The shrine bells toll across a world built on faith, yet faith is a blade, and in the wrong hands it cuts deepest. On a holy world where millions kneel to the Emperor's light, a new preacher takes the pulpit. His words drip like honey, his verses burn like fire, and behind his sermon stirs a truth black as the warp itself. This is not devotion. This is corruption in plain sight. The crowd does not know it yet, but their prayers no longer rise to Terra. They sink into the abyss. Stand with us, faithful viewer, as we walk into the sanctum of lies. Before we begin, strike the like, bend the knee to subscribe, and toll the bell so that you never miss another descent into the grim dark night of the 41st millennium. Here, in the smoke of incense and the cries of the damned, begins the tale of the butcher's sermon. Incense clung to the rafters like old ghosts, heavy and sweet, turning the temple's high vault into a haze of gold. The bells had tolled the hour before dawn, drawing the faithful from hab blocks and pilgrim dormitories and the open-air courtyards where penitents slept under statues of saints. They came in shuffling tides, their breath pluming in the winter chill, their mouths moving with the same familiar prayers they had learned as children. The doors of the Basilica of the Hundredfold Wounds stood open, bronze and scarred and layered with votive seals. I had opened them myself, more mornings than I could count, palms blackened by incense, soot, fingertips scarred by hot wax. I was acolyte, sure, candleman, and voice for the Kaland response when the old priest's throat failed him. It should have been a morning like any other. But as the crowd pressed in, and the nave filled with bodies, and the murmurs thickened, I felt a tremor beneath my boots, nothing violent, just the suggestion of a distant drumbeat, like a heart beating in the belly of the world. I glanced at the floor, at the white-veined marble that had been quarried at the founding of our shrine world, and told myself it was carts on the plaza or a heavy wind shuddering the buttresses. The others didn't notice. They were already striking flint to lamps, elevating reliquaries, straightening the velvet drapery behind the pulpit. One of the sextons, a thin woman with an iron mouth, smacked my wrist when she found me standing still. "Move, doll," she hissed, and pushed a tray of unlit tapers into my arms. "They said he will speak at dawn. The people must see the light. He, the new shepherd." The words went around the basilica like a rumor of rain in a thirsty land. The old priest had died 3 nights past, silent as a spilled lamp, his breath failing between taplet psalms. He'd been more parchment than flesh the last year, his eyes milky, his tongue struggling to wrap itself around even the simplest callings. The conclave of prelates had whispered for months about a successor. We heard names: Brother Gilead, Mother Santris of the Scarlet Choir, even a rumor of a visiting confessor from Segmentum Command, but some unseen hand had written a different name. Last night a courier servitor had brought a single sentence to the sacristy: "The shepherd comes at dawn." I lit the tapers and passed them down the side aisles, the little flames catching and multiplying, the nave brightening in 1,000 trembling points. Pilgrims took the candles with reverence. Some wept. One old man pressed the taper's base to his forehead and left a ring of soot there, a black halo. The murmur swelled. The choirmaster tapped his baton. The first chord rolled a deep-throated drone from the organ towers, and the noise that lives inside sacred stone, the one that turns sound into something you feel beneath. Your ribs woke and uncoiled. I looked up. The frescoes overhead showed the triumph at Gethros, the emperor's halo, burning like a small sun over a sea of bayonets. I had seen those faces 1,000 times. Today they looked sharper. The painter's red seemed fresher, the wounds less metaphor and more meat. I blinked hard, and the illusion, if it was one, went away. The side doors opened, and a procession entered, censer-bearers first, swinging braziers that limned the air with shimmering heat. Then the white-trobed choir, their faces hidden by gauze. Then the deacons, with their heavy books. And finally the man. He did not wear the gold-threaded vestments of a prelate. His robe was plain red, unadorned but for a narrow strip of black around the hem and cuffs. He was not old. That startled me more than his dress. I had expected gray hair, a stoop, the shuffle of someone bowed under a lifetime of ritual. Instead, he walked with easy balance, head lifted, hands loose at his sides. His face was pale, but not sickly. His hair black and close-cropped. His mouth unsmiling but not stern. There was a small line between his brows, the kind you find on men who listen more than they speak. He stepped onto the pulpit without climbing the stair. I swear it. One moment his sandaled feet were on the flagstones. The next he was above us, in the honeyed light, the red robe falling in clean lines around him. No one else reacted. The choir kept singing. The censer smoke rose in a slow tide. I wiped sweat from my neck, though the air was cold, and tried to tell myself there must be a narrow stair inside the pulpit I had never noticed. A trick of light. The drums of the organ fell away, leaving the whisper of 1,000 bodies packed close. The subsonic breath that fills a great church between words. Faithful, he said. The voice did not come from his mouth. It came from everywhere under my tongue, behind my ears, in the hollows of the pillars. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Everyone heard it, as if he whispered to each alone. The sexton's iron mouth softened. A penitential flagellant near the front stopped striking his own back and lowered his barbed cords. The old man with the soot halo lifted his chin, his eyes shining with sudden tears. I am but a servant. I have come to listen. It was not what I expected. No proclamation, no pomp. He let the words sit, as if waiting for our hearts to catch up. In that pause, I felt the tremor again, the drum beat through the stone, and realized it was answering him, listening, as if the basilica itself leaned closer. He spoke then of small things, of hunger and the way it gnaws softly in the night, of hands that shake not from age, but from a lifetime of fear. He spoke of mothers who dull their children's hunger with stories, and of fathers who lie about the ache in their bones so they can go back to work in the manufactorum the next morning. He talked of the ache behind the eyes that never leaves. The one you hide with wrote prayers because you do not want to frighten your own soul by naming it. He knew the words we whispered when we could not sleep. He knew the way guilt creeps like mold into the corners of a life, green and black and stubborn. He did not preach against it. He laid it out, gentle as a physician, revealing a wound. The emperor, he said, and the name rang like a bell in our bellies, made of men a people who could endure. Yet endurance without understanding is a slow death. Your pain means something. Your fear is a signpost, not a sin. Would you turn away a saint's fingerbone if it bled? Would you scorn a miracle because it frightens you? I saw a woman near the nave's center, brown hands cracked from soap and rope, raise one palm and then snatch it back as if afraid she'd be seen. The new shepherd turned his face toward her and did not look away until she set the hand on her heart. He nodded once, simple, human. The choir master looked at him with wet eyes, as if he'd waited 20 years to be seen. He took the book from the deacon without glancing down, thumbed it open to a psalm I could have recited in my sleep, and read it. The words were the same. They rang different. The slow cadence of that old hymn, the one about the angel with a flaming sword barring the way, folded on itself like water in a carved bowl. The rhyme slid just slightly, so that a phrase about mercy bore the weight, and a phrase about judgment hung light as incense smoke. If he changed any syllable, I could not catch him at it, but when he closed the book and held it against his chest, it felt as if someone had lifted a lid I had forgotten was clamped over my mouth. The organ came in, and the congregation's answer swelled, tidal, bigger than the stones could hold. I realized I was singing without meaning to. My voice braided with the old man's and the iron-mouthed sexton's and the flagellants and a child's somewhere in the rear gallery. A woman next to me pressed her shoulder against mine. I didn't know her name, but in that moment I knew the shape of her grief better than I knew my own. We stood there, strangers and not, and the shepherd watched us as a smith watches a blade in his quench, measuring color, listening for the right note. He did not raise his hands. He did not thunder or spit or burn. He simply spoke until the light through the rose window paled and then warmed again as the sun climbed. He set a small story in the air like a bird, about a boy who kept a flame alive through a storm, not by shielding it but by feeding it. He told of a saint who broke bread not with the faithful but with the fearful, and how the fearful remembered his face when the faithful forgot. He returned again and again to a word I had never heard from the pulpit. He named it holy. He said it drives men toward truth the way thirst drives them to water. I thought of the tremor under my boots, that regular thump, and wondered if the world itself had a hunger, and if the shepherd had come to feed it when he dismissed us. He did it, not with a blessing, but with a question. What did you bring today that you are afraid to lay down? The doors opened, and the winter light fell across 100 faces at once. Some laughed softly, that relieved laughter that comes after a fever breaks. Some wept and tried to hide it, and then let it be seen. We filed out with the slow, shuffling dignity of a funeral that is not the end. The iron-mouthed sexton took my elbow. You'll carry his words to the kitchens, she said. There are 300 mouths at the noon line. You will read for them. Her voice had lost its bite. I nodded and found I was smiling without thinking. When I reached the plaza, I looked up at the basilica's facade and saw that pigeons had alighted on the saints, brows and shoulders as if drawn by warmth that had not been there before. He did not leave. That was the second strange thing. Visiting preachers and confessors came and went like comets. This one moved down the steps and into the crowd. He touched no one. Yet, wherever he walked, people turned their faces after him, the way flowers follow the sun. A child laughed and ran to catch his shadow. He paused and let the boy step on it, as if that were a game the man loved. His eyes passed over me once, and I felt for half a heartbeat like a window flung open in an old house. Fresh air, and something wild beyond the hedges. At noon I stood on a crate beside the soup line and read back his phrases to the hungry. I am not a good speaker. I mangle vowels. Under my tongue, his words moved without splinters. People who did not come to morning service dokers with salt in their hair. College girls with bruises under their eyes looked up from their bowls and listened. A man with a broken nose smiled without showing his teeth. An old woman with a tremor held her cup steady while I read. And I swear to the saints, the shaking stopped. We spoke of him all afternoon. The acolytes in the sacristy spoke softly, as if he might be on the other side of the curtain. The sextons polished the candlesticks twice. The choirmaster tuned and retuned the organ, as if now he could hear infinitesimal imperfections that had never troubled him before. Even the lay guards outside, men who honest to emperor slept through the litany of dawn, kept shifting on their feet like horses at the scent of rain. I took the late shift, preparing the nave for sundown prayers, just so I could be there if he spoke again. When the bells tolled the evening hour, the tremor returned, felt not in the floor this time, but in my ribs. The light through the western clerestory was red. Not the soft red of stained glass, but a color like embers close to going out. I stood near the font and dipped my fingers, the water stinging the little cuts along my knuckles. The pilgrims were quieter now, not cowed, not sated, quiet, like men on the cusp of a thing. When the shepherd stepped into the nave, he did not go to the pulpit. He stopped near the font, where a carved seraph's eyes watched 100 uncounted baptisms, and he placed his palm against the seraph's stone cheek. For a moment it seemed as if the sculpture leaned into the touch. I blinked. It was stone again, cold and ancient. There are 2 hungers, he said without preamble. One is yours. One is the world's. You fear they are enemies. They are not. Someone near the front laughed once, a bark like a man surprised to find himself alive. The shepherd turned his head slightly, as if he could hear the shape of that laugh, and a smile almost touched his mouth. I was a boy, he said. I was taught the same prayers you were. I was told the world is full of teeth. It is. But no one told me who they belonged to. A wind seemed to move through the basilica, not the kind that ruffles candles, the kind that makes skin remember winter, even in summer. The tremor came again, and I found my spine answering it, vertebra by vertebra, as if some long sleeping beast in me had rolled and taken a deeper breath. A man in a senator's sash, one of our donors, one of those with rings on every finger, stepped forward. He was not known for humility. He was known for standing at the front like a living statue and letting his wife bleed piety for both. Now he came all the way to the font. When he lifted it, the water ran as if thick, catching the red light and holding it. I would swear, before saint and saintmaker, that when he crossed himself, for an instant, the sign his fingers traced had more points than it should. I looked away, heart thudding, and when I glanced back, his hand was clean and the cross ordinary. Father, the senator said, voice thin. Stay. His bottom lip trembled like a child's. The shepherd studied him with that smith's look again, weighing, listening. I have come, he said simply, and I will remain until the hunger is met. After, in the sacristy, the other acolytes buzzed like incense bees. Mother Relia, who kept the reliquaries and knew the catalogues of saints by page and line, spoke to me as if we were equals, her voice soft with awe. There is a current she said, pinching the bridge of her nose. Under everything, he says. I felt it in my teeth. Doll, I have been here 30 years. No one has ever made me feel the scriptures like that. Is it right? I asked, hating my own smallness for asking, but unable to keep from it. She took a long time to answer. It is powerful, she said at last. Power is not a sin. That night, I did not sleep. In my cell above the south transept, with the rose window spilling a blood-tinged moonlight across my pillow, I lay and listened to the city breath, the manufactorum shift whistles, the barges groaning on the river, the distant, constant hum of the foundries, a cry somewhere in the alleys, a burst of laughter that broke like a glass and cut the silence into bright edges. And underneath all of it, faint as the memory of a song, the tremor through the bones of the world, steady as a drum. I felt it in my teeth, like Mother Relia said. I felt it in my wrist where the sexton had left her mark. I felt it in my gut the way you feel the sea, long after you step off the boat. Before dawn, I rose and went to the basilica alone. The doors were unlocked. The nave was dark, but for a few guttering candles. He was there, standing where I had seen him place his palm on the seraph's cheek. He did not turn when he heard me. I knelt because I did not know what else to do. Doll, he said, and my name fit in his mouth as if he had always known it. You came hungry. Yes, I said, and surprise flared in me that the truth cost nothing to speak. I don't know for what. For the end of smallness, he said. For the moment a man stops pretending his fractures make him less, and realizes they make him a vessel. The tremor in the stone deepened, and for one heartbeat I felt as if I knelt at the edge of a cliff and the sea below inhaled. I should have been afraid. The fear did not push me back. It leaned me forward into it, as into winter water after a summer of filth. Words I cannot fully recall, except as shapes circles within circles. A spine of syllables that made the air taste like iron. I thought of the old man with the soot halo, of the senator with red-tinted water on his brow, of the flagellants, cords slack in his hands. I thought of the two hungers. When he finished, he did not bless me. He put his hand on my crown, light as ash. Listen today, he said. Not with your ears. I went back to my work. I opened the bronze doors. I struck the lamps. The faithful came like tide. The bells tolled. And as the first foot crossed the threshold, somewhere under us, deep in the dark foundations of the shrine world, something answered the peal with a slow, delighted laugh that only I seemed to hear. The days that followed his arrival stretched thin, like fabric drawn tight across a frame. At first, life in the shrine world's capital seemed unchanged. The bells tolled the same hours. The manufactorums vented their smoke in the same slow spirals. The pilgrims still shuffled up the long staircases to leave offerings at the feet of the saints. Yet beneath the rhythm of ritual, something subtle shifted, as though the air itself carried a pulse only some could hear. I knew it wasn't only me. At first it was whispers. Market women who once traded gossip about prices or about the governors. Latest decrees now spoke of him instead of his voice. His eyes, how he seemed to call their private griefs into the open without shaming them. Dockside laborers returned from the basilica with expressions not softened by piety but sharpened with purpose. Even the flagellants, men and women, whose backs were latticed with scars, struck themselves less and listened more. Waiting for the next sermon, I caught myself watching the faces of the crowd before dawn prayers. They leaned forward, breathless, before he even spoke. When he began, the hush was deeper than silence. He didn't shout, never thundered from the pulpit like our old priest. He spoke softly, as if telling confidences one by one. The strange thing was how his voice changed depending on who heard it. The old penitent, who always shook from palsy, swore it was a lullaby that steadied her. The young militiaman told me it sounded like a battle cry. To me, it was something else entirely, like a hand under my ribs pushing me forward toward a door I had never dared open. The first real change came in the icons. I was tending candles at the transept when I noticed the gilded panel of St. Regan had cracked. At least, I thought it had. His painted halo was not the perfect oval I had dusted for years. It stretched higher, the top arcing like a flame. His eyes, once lifted to the heavens, seemed now to glance at me with something conspiratorial. I thought it a trick of light, but the next day the crack was gone, the paint smoothed again, yet the flame-shaped halo remained. I asked Brother Ishiel, the iconographer, whether he had repainted it. He only frowned and shook his head. I wouldn't dare. That panel is older than this city. When I pressed, he grew angry, his cheeks blotched red. Don't ask me again, doll. I don't want to see it. He fled the chapel, muttering prayers. That night, in the refectory, I heard two novices whispering about another fresco where the angel's wings had gained a third set of pinions. They said it gave them chills to look upon it, and yet they could not stop staring. The shepherd never addressed these changes. He only spoke his sermons as if each word had been waiting for centuries in the stone. Yet after every sermon, another small alteration appeared. An inscription on a saint's reliquary, once carved in high Gothic, now bore a curling flourish at its edge, a shape like an eye. The stained glass of the north window, which depicted the emperor bathed in golden radiance, glowed faint red at dusk, as if a second sun burned behind him. No one admitted to seeing it, but many lingered in the nave after vespers, staring until the last light died. The faithful began to dream. At first, they told these dreams shyly, in confessions or in half-mumbled remarks in the soup lines. They dreamed of rivers of fire that carried them unburnt into fields of shining dark. They dreamed of saints whose faces were blurred, but whose voices sang in harmonies so beautiful they woke weeping. They dreamed of the shepherd himself, standing at the edge of the sky, his arms open as though to embrace an infinite night. I dreamed, too. One night I saw the basilica rising like a tower of bone, its spire stabbing into clouds that churned with lightning. I was inside, and the frescoes shifted with every breath. Saints sprouting more limbs, angels opening mouths in their chests, the emperor's light flaring into crimson wings. I woke with my chest heaving, sweat running cold down my ribs. For a long time I sat in the dark cell, whispering rote prayers until my lips bled. They did not comfort me. They only echoed like hollow shells. The hunger he had spoken of grew stronger. Men ate double rations at the soup lines and still left gnawing their knuckles. Acolytes filled their bowls twice at supper and licked them clean, then rose in the night to scour the kitchens for crusts. Mothers clutched children tighter, as though afraid something would take them away. All of us looked thinner by the week, though no one spoke of famine. There was enough food. The hunger was not in our bellies, it was somewhere deeper, in the marrow, in the soul. One evening, a merchant's guild held a feast to honor the shepherd. It was not unusual. Patrons often sought blessings at banquets. But when he took his place at the head of the table, something shifted. The plates were piled with meats, cheeses, rare wines, luxuries. Even the governor seldom tasted. At first, it was polite. Grace was said. The first course was served. But as the shepherd began to speak, his voice low and measured, the guests stopped listening to their own words. They shoveled food with their hands, tearing loaves apart, gulping wine until it spilled down their chins. I watched a magistrate choke and vomit, then fall to his knees to lap the bile and meat from the floor. Women tore jewels from their necks, biting the gems until their gums bled. The shepherd only smiled faintly, as though watching children at play. His words wrapped the room like chains. The feast is not for the body. It is for the soul, and the soul is starving. When the frenzy ended, when the guests slumped like animals too full to move, I realized half of them were weeping with gratitude. They believed they had glimpsed some higher truth. The governor himself staggered to the shepherd, fell to his knees, and pressed his signet ring into the man's palm. The shepherd closed his fingers around it as gently as if it were a child's tooth. The next day, the governor's decrees were read aloud by criers in the plaza. The shrine's laws would now be written not by the conclave of priests, nor by the governor's council, but by the shepherd himself. No one protested. The square erupted in cheers. Those who whispered doubts began to disappear. A scribe who had muttered that the frescoes looked wrong was not at his post the next morning. A lay brother who suggested the new hunger was a test of punishment never returned from his nightly rounds. Their names were not spoken after that. I found myself avoiding certain corners of the basilica. The southern crypt smelled of iron, though no relics there had ever wept blood. The sacristy, where we kept old vestments, seemed warmer than it should be, as though a furnace glowed behind the walls. I swore I saw a ripple of shadow under the stone lid. I closed my eyes and walked away. Yet even as dread coiled tighter in my gut, part of me thrilled at his presence. Each time he looked at me, I felt the window open again, the air fresh and sharp. It was as if he peeled back the lie of ordinary life and showed me something vast and waiting. He began ending sermons with the same question each time: "What do you fear to give up?" The faithful answered without words. Mothers set infants on the altar steps. Men dragged tools and weapons, laying them down as if surrendering burdens. A woman knelt weeping and cut off her hair, placing it in a heap at his feet. He touched each offering only once, briefly, and then left it. Yet when he walked away, the objects seemed to dissolve into smoke. I asked Brother Ishial again, desperate for reason. "Does this seem right?" I whispered. His face had grown thin, his eyes bloodshot. He only shook his head. "Don't ask," he croaked. "Please don't ask." That night, the tremor in the world was louder. It rattled the lamps on their hooks, shook dust from the rafters. I lay awake, clutching my blanket, knowing with a cold certainty that the hunger had begun to feed. And we were its feast. The summons was unlike any the shrine world had heard in generations. Pilgrims flocked from outlying settlements, from mining colonies in the mountains, from the frozen fields where peasants bent their backs to the soil. A week before the day of the feast, heralds went out into the plazas, declaring that all were called to attend a grand liturgy at the basilica. The governor's own seal hung from the proclamation, alongside the sigil of the conclave. Yet above them both was a third mark, one I had never seen before, carved deep into the parchment in a curling hand of scarlet ink, a stylized brand, sharp and flowing like a tongue of fire. No one dared question it aloud, though I saw unease ripple through the older priests when they saw the sign. Still, they made ready, because refusal was unthinkable. The morning of the feast, the basilica's steps became a tide of bodies. Incense poured from censers until the square was smothered in haze, and great braziers were lit along the processional route, casting pillars of flame high into the dawn. I had never seen such spectacle. Choirs were doubled, then tripled. Their voices carried for miles, a storm of human devotion. Market stalls closed, manufactura shut down, every cog and lever of daily life halted so that all could attend. If faith had ever been the marrow of this world, now it was its only pulse. I served with the other acolytes, preparing the nave. We placed chalices of water at every pew, spread loaves of unleavened bread in great wicker baskets, and polished the golden lamps until their flames reflected like stars. The altar itself was draped in a new cloth, crimson velvet heavy enough to drag the floor, embroidered not with the familiar sigil of the Aquila, but with an unfamiliar motif, a spiral, twisting inward like a funnel into darkness. When the shepherd arrived, the bells fell silent. He wore no crown, no heavy robe of office, only his ordinary vestments, threadbare black, a cord about his waist, and a chain of iron across his shoulders. Yet the crowd shifted, as one falling to their knees, as if gravity itself had commanded it. He walked slowly through their ranks, his fingers brushing foreheads, his lips whispering blessings. Each soul he touched shook violently, and then wept, overcome with joy. I felt the air tighten, as though a storm pressed against the stained glass, waiting to break. The liturgy began in familiar cadence. Hymns were sung, the old rites recited, the emperor's name praised. But as the shepherd mounted the pulpit, his voice rolled low and steady, a thunder that did not need to rise above the human ear to be heard. "You are hungry," he said, "and I bring you food." The words trembled through the crowd, stirring a restlessness that was not simple appetite. 1,000 voices murmured agreement, sighs like surf against stone. He spoke of hunger as a gift, not a curse. The flesh is weak, but the hunger in it is proof of the soul's yearning. Hunger is the emperor's knife, carving away what is frail, leaving only what is strong. Do not fear it, embrace it. He lifted his hands, and the velvet cloth on the altar shifted, as though stirred by breath from below. The distribution of bread began. We acolytes carried the baskets row by row. At first it was ordinary, the poor tearing hunks with trembling fingers, the wealthy breaking small pieces daintily, the children nibbling while their parents whispered prayers. But soon the tone changed. Their chewing grew frantic, lips glistening, teeth gnashing with almost animal fervor. People fought for larger pieces, hands clawing at the baskets, the fragile civility of worship breaking like glass. The loaves dwindled far too quickly, though we had baked more than enough. I saw a man bite into his neighbor's hand for daring to reach first. A woman screamed as her child's crust was stolen. The nave roared with voices, hunger thick as smoke. The shepherd's words lashed through the chaos. Do not be ashamed. The body knows what the spirit longs for. His smile stretched wide, his eyes bright with a feverish glow. Then he raised his hand. An attendance I had never seen before, men in scarlet robes with hoods, pulled, low emerged from side chapels, carrying great bowls covered with iron lids. They placed them on the altar. When the lids lifted, the smell struck like a hammer. Rich, metallic, sweet in a way that turned the stomach. The bowls were filled with meat, not roasted animal flesh, but something darker, raw, slick with blood. The scarlet-robed attendants began to ladle it out with long-handled spoons, pouring chunks into the chalices of water until the liquid turned red. The shepherd's voice rose, still calm but thrumming with command. This is sacrament. This is strength. This is the feast that binds you to eternity. Take and eat. Some recoiled in horror. I remember Father Jassel, a priest older than my grandfather, gasping, "This is blasphemy," before he could choke the words back. But the crowd did not care. They surged forward, scrambling for the chalices, gulping the mixture down until it ran down their necks. Their eyes rolled, their throats convulsed, and when they raised their faces again, they shone with ecstasy. Cries of joy and terror mingled. I saw a mother press the cup to her infant's lips, saw men fighting over spattered remnants in the bottom of bowls. Father Jassel tried to step onto the pulpit, clutching his Aquila, but the shepherd's attendants seized him. They dragged him screaming to the altar and flung him down upon it. The velvet cloth stained quickly, seeping black through crimson. The shepherd took up a blade from his belt, a long, cruel thing that looked like it had been forged from a shard of iron, still pitted with age. He raised it high, his face glowing with triumph. The first to deny shall be the first to bless. The blade fell, the old priest's cry cut short. The congregation gasped, then erupted into thunderous acclaim. Not a single soul moved to stop it. The blood splashed across the altar, spilling into the bowls, mingling with the strange meat. The shepherd dipped his fingers in and traced a spiral on his forehead, the same curling mark that had appeared on the proclamations. "He is fed," the shepherd intoned, "and you are chosen." My legs trembled so badly, I nearly dropped the empty basket I carried. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. Yet some deeper terror held me still, as though invisible cords bound me to the floor. Around me, others who had not drunk or eaten stared in shock, but even their faces softened as the shepherd's voice rolled over them. He began to chant in a tongue I did not know, syllables harsh and liquid, curling like smoke. The air shimmered. The frescoes along the nave walls twisted as though alive, their saints bending, their faces splitting into multiple grimaces, their halos warping into spirals of flame. The congregation took up the chant, wordless at first, then shaping the foreign sounds with their tongues, the cadence spreading like fire through dry grass. Even those who had resisted began to mouth the words. A pressure built in my chest, a sense that if I did not join, I would be crushed beneath the weight of silence. My lips began to move. I hated myself, but I could not stop. The shepherd's eyes swept across us, a light with satisfaction. He raised his bloody blade and pointed it toward the great statue of the emperor that loomed above the altar. For centuries it had stood in gold leaf and marble, a beacon of light to all who entered. Now, before our eyes, a crack split its chest. The golden surface peeled away like shed skin, revealing something darker beneath. Stone black as pitch, veined with red eyes, hollow sockets that glowed faintly as embers. The congregation wailed in awe, throwing themselves prostrate. "The emperor is not blind," the shepherd cried. "He sees you now as you truly are. He is no tyrant of dead stone. He is flame, hunger, and word, and his word is alive in us." 100 voices screamed in rapture. Others sobbed, torn between fear and joy. A woman near me gouged her own palm with her nails, holding the blood aloft like an offering. The shepherd nodded toward her, and 2 attendants rushed to collect it in a chalice. "Every drop is holy," he declared. "Every breath is a hymn." The feast became frenzy. People clambered onto the altar, tearing pieces from the slain priest's body, smearing blood across their faces, stuffing flesh into their mouths, with tears streaming down their cheeks. The spiral symbol was carved into arms, chests, even foreheads by those desperate to mark themselves as chosen. The shepherd moved among them, blessing each with his blade, tracing its edge gently across their skin until blood welled up in neat lines. I stumbled backward, pressed against a pillar, heart hammering. My stomach heaved at the stench, my ears rang with chants, yet a small part of me quivered with the same hunger that consumed them. I bit my tongue until I tasted iron, forcing myself to remember who I was, what I had once believed. But the spiral burned in my vision, and the shepherd's words looped through my skull like a prayer I had always known. The feast lasted until dawn. By then the nave was drenched, the altar awash. The faithful collapsed in heaps of exhaustion and ecstasy. The shepherd stood alone at the pulpit, his hands raised, his voice calm once more. "You are no longer a flock," he said. "You are a host, and the word has been written in your flesh. From this day forward, you are mine, as I am his. Rejoice." And they did. Even through their sobs and gasps, they rejoiced. The shrine world had been reborn that night, not as a sanctuary of the emperor's light, but as something else, something darker, something hungry. I knew, with a certainty that hollowed me to the bone, that this was only the beginning. The days after the feast unfolded like a fever dream. The square around the basilica never emptied. The faithful lingered, sleeping on the flagstones, murmuring prayers in their sleep, waking only to chant the shepherd's spirals in endless refrain. Merchants stopped selling goods, instead setting up stalls of bread and water to be given freely, their faces vacant with devotion. Even the governor's guard, once stern and disciplined, stood slack-jawed at their posts, carving spirals into the wood of their rifles. But not all were caught in the shepherd's net. In back alleys and shuttered homes, whispers flickered like dying candles. Old priests, the few who had not vanished in the days leading up to the feast, gathered in secret. I was summoned by one of them, Father Baron, whose hands shook as he clasped mine. His eyes were red from sleeplessness, and he looked more ghost than man. "You were there," he rasped. "You saw what they did to Tell us true, was it, as we fear?" I told him. I told them everything, the raw flesh, the blood in the chalices, the spiral carved in living skin, their faces twisted, not with disbelief, but with grief, as though my words were the final nail in a coffin they had already built. "Then it is as we feared," Baron whispered. "The arch-enemy has found us. The word-bearers walk among us." The name struck like a blow. I had heard of them only in stories told to frighten children. Heretics who were once brothers to the Emperor's angels, but now worshippers of the abyss. And yet the memory of the shepherd's glowing eyes, his blade, his honeyed tongue, it fit. The old priests swore oaths that they would resist, even if resistance meant martyrdom. They spoke of raising a message to the planetary Vox relays, of summoning aid from the Segmentum fleet. But each plan faltered. The relays were controlled by the shepherd's adherents now. The militia, once loyal, had taken to wearing red strips of cloth across their arms, a silent badge of devotion. Even the governor had been seen kneeling at the shepherd's feet, his robes stained with blood like any common worshipper. Their conclave was small, a handful of priests, 3 nuns, a scattered few who had resisted drinking or eating during the feast. They looked to me as a witness, though I was only a boy. My heart hammered, but I swore with them. It was all I could do. The shepherd's sermons continued daily, each more fevered, each more violent. Where once he preached in the basilica, now he preached in the open square, his voice carrying through hidden amplifiers that made the stones themselves seem to thrum with his words. He spoke of the emperor as flame, as hunger, as word made flesh. He denounced the old rites, calling them shackles of the deaf and the blind. The faithful screamed agreement, tearing pages from prayer, books, and feeding them to the braziers as offerings. It was during one of these gatherings that resistance made its first move. Father Baron and 3 of the nuns had smuggled a cache of firebombs into the cloisters. Their plan was desperate: ignite the basilica during the sermon, while the shepherd stood at the pulpit. Perhaps the flames would consume him, or at least scatter the congregation long enough for a message to be sent off-world. I was with them when they crept through the side passages, the nuns whispering litanies under their breath. My hands trembled as I carried one of the crude canisters, the smell of promethium sharp in my nose. In the square, thousands knelt in rapture, eyes lifted to the shepherd. His arms were raised, the crimson velvet of the altar cloth billowing like wings behind him. He spoke of unity, of sacrifice, of a new covenant written in blood. And as he spoke, I saw a dozen attendants roll forward a massive iron cage. Within it knelt prisoners, men and women who had tried to flee the city in the days after the feast. Their hands were bound, their faces gaunt, but their eyes still burned with desperate clarity. They had not drunk, they had not eaten, they had resisted. The shepherd gestured to them with a slow sweep of his hand. "See how the wheat resists the scythe, and see how it must be cut." The crowd roared. The cage was dragged to the base of the altar, its door unlocked. One by one, the prisoners were hauled out and laid on the steps. The shepherd's attendants drew blades, long and curved, slick with old stains. The air vibrated with the anticipation of slaughter. Father Baron clenched his teeth. "Now," he whispered. He lit the fuse of his firebomb with a trembling match. The nun beside him did the same. They hurled them toward the pulpit. For a heartbeat, hope flared in me like sunrise. The canisters arced through the air, trailing sparks. They landed at the shepherd's feet and burst, engulfing the altar in fire. The crowd screamed, reeling back from the heat. The prisoners cried out. For a moment, the shepherd vanished in the blaze. But then a new sound rose, not the shriek of a dying man, but laughter. A deep, rolling laugh that chilled the marrow of my bones. The flames parted as if forced by unseen hands. The shepherd stepped through, untouched. His vestments smoldered but did not burn. His skin gleamed wet with heat but did not blister. His eyes glowed like twin suns. "Fools," he said, his voice carrying over the roar of fire. "Do you think flame can harm the servant of flame? Your emperor gave us fire. We have perfected it." He lifted his hand, and the braziers around the square erupted. Towers of flame spiraling upward in shapes that writhed like serpents. The crowd fell prostrate, screaming their adoration. The nuns froze in horror. Father Baron fumbled for another bomb, but the shepherd's attendants were already moving. They descended upon us like wolves, blades flashing. The first nun's throat was slit before she could cry out. The second was dragged by her hair into the square, her bomb ripped from her hands. Baron swung his torch wildly, setting a tapestry alight, but a curved blade plunged into his chest. He gasped once, blood spraying across my face, then crumpled. I dropped my canister, the fuse sputtering in the wet. Strong hands seized me, dragging me forward. I kicked, I screamed, but the roar of the congregation drowned me out. They hauled me before the shepherd, still wreathed in fire. His face glistened with sweat, his smile serene. He placed a hand on my head, and the world seemed to tilt. "This one resists," he said, his voice honey and venom at once. "This one is a witness. He will learn." The crowd howled agreement. My arms were wrenched behind me, bound with chains, slick from the blood of the prisoners. I was thrown among them, pressed to the stones as the attendants lifted their blades. The first cut fell across a man beside me, splitting him open from throat to belly. His blood fountained across the steps. The second prisoner screamed as her hands were hacked off, her stumps raised like offerings. The crowd shrieked approval, drunk on the slaughter. One by one, they died. Their bodies fed into the flames. When at last the attendants came for me, I could not breathe. The shepherd's hand lifted, halting them. "Not this one," he said. "He is chosen for another purpose." I was dragged back, chained to a pillar at the edge of the square. There I watched as the rest of the prisoners were butchered, their blood collected in silver chalices and raised high to the chanting masses. The shepherd lifted one, drank deep, and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "This is the true sacrament," he declared. "Blood of the strong, flesh of the faithful. You have tasted. Now you must burn." At his signal, the attendants lifted torches and set the prisoners' corpses alight. Their screams echoed even in death, the fat sizzling, the smell clinging to the air like grease. The crowd swayed as if drunk, their chants slurring into an inhuman rhythm. The spiral symbol glowed on their foreheads as though branded with living fire. The resistance died that night. The priests who had sworn to defy him were gone, their ashes scattered in the square. Only a handful remained in hiding, too few to matter. The shepherd had crushed their first defiance and turned it into spectacle. The congregation had seen their leaders burn, and instead of despair, they found ecstasy, As I hung in my chains, choking on the smoke of burning flesh, I realized the shepherd's brilliance. He had not merely silenced dissent. He had made it part of his sermon. Resistance itself had become a ritual, another sacrifice to bind the faithful tighter. Each act of defiance would only feed his fire. That night, the square glowed with embers until dawn. The basilica's spire cracked, blackened by the flames, but still it stood, and from its ruined pulpit the shepherd preached long after the sun had risen, his voice raw but unbroken. "There will be no more doubt," he proclaimed. "There will be no more blindness. There will only be flame and word and blood. This world is ours now." And the people cheered. The days blurred into one another. Smoke hung over the city like a veil, a mixture of incense and human ash. The bells no longer tolled to mark the hours. Instead, they rang whenever the shepherd desired, summoning the faithful at his whim. The marketplace was abandoned. The governor's palace stood empty, its banners of the Aquila torn down and replaced with crimson. Cloth embroidered with spirals that seemed to twist of their own accord. Every street echoed with hymns, and every wall was daubed with scripture, written not in ink, but in blood. I remained in chains, a prisoner in plain sight. They kept me tethered to a pillar in the square, forced to watch each sermon, each sacrifice, each orgy of blood and fire. I became part of the spectacle, a reminder to the people that resistance was folly, that even witnesses must kneel in time. But I did not kneel. Not yet. The shepherd grew more radiant with each passing day. His skin glowed as though lit from within, veins pulsing with molten light. His voice no longer echoed from the basilica's vox, but from the very stones themselves, deep and sonorous, vibrating in the marrow of every listener. When he spread his arms, flames licked at his fingertips, coiling into words that hung in the air like banners of fire. He called it the New Scripture, and the people believed. It was on the seventh night after the burning of the priests that the shepherd announced his final sermon. The bells rang not in sequence, but in frenzy, a mad peal that shook the city awake. The faithful flooded the square, tens of thousands pressed together in breathless anticipation. They came from every district, every hovel, every farmstead. They carried torches, icons of spirals, chalices filled with blood from their own veins. The air trembled with their chanting, a wordless hum that rose like a storm. I was hauled before the pulpit, my chains heavy, my body weak from hunger. My eyes stung from smoke and sleeplessness, but I could not look away. The shepherd stood on the altar, bathed in light that was not light, but a red, pulsing glow from nowhere. His vestments were no longer velvet. His face was beatific, lips curved in a smile that promised peace and delivered terror. "My children," he began, his voice carrying without effort, saturating every ear. "You have given me your faith. You have given me your blood. Tonight you will give me your souls, and in return I will give you truth." The crowd erupted in ecstasy, 1,000 voices shrieking praise, their arms raised as though to grasp the stars themselves. The shepherd raised his hands, and the fires around the square leaped higher, spirals of flame twisting into shapes that defied sense wings, teeth, eyes that blinked and stared. The people wept, seeing visions in the fire. Some fell to their knees, clawing their own flesh open in joy. The shepherd's attendants wheeled forward another cage, but this time It was not prisoners inside. It was children, dozens of them, taken from their homes, dressed in rags, their faces pale with terror. The crowd gasped, not in horror, but in hunger. "These are the lambs," the shepherd intoned, "and the lambs must be bled, that the flock may be fed." He drew his blade, that same cruel crescent of black iron. The children screamed as the attendants dragged them out one by one. The shepherd raised the blade high and brought it down, swift and sure. Blood sprayed in arcs across the altar. The crowd surged forward, hands outstretched to catch it, smearing it across their faces, their chests, their tongues. They howled with rapture. No longer human, no longer sane. I turned my face away, but still I heard the wet impacts, the shrieks cut short, the roar of the multitude. My stomach heaved, but no vomit came. I was empty. Only hollow despair remained. When the last child's body was cast into the flames, the shepherd lifted his gore-soaked hands to the sky. "Do you feel it?" he cried. "The veil is thin. The gate opens. The word is spoken." The ground trembled. The stones of the square cracked. The sky itself seemed to warp, stars bending, the moon splitting into mirrored crescents. A wind howled from nowhere, carrying with it whispers that made my ears bleed. The faithful screamed with joy, clawing at their eyes, their ears, tearing their own skin as the voices filled them. And then I saw them, shapes in the fire, vast and terrible, wings that blotted the stars, faces made of mouths, eyes like pits of hunger. They pressed against reality, eager, slavering, their howls echoing through the warp into the square. The shepherd's sermon had not been words alone, had been a ritual, a binding litany carved into the souls of the congregation. They were the vessel, and now the vessel cracked. The people convulsed as one. Flesh bubbled, bones snapped, spines twisted. Their mouths stretched into impossible grins, their eyes rolled back, their bellies split open to birth shapes of smoke and fire. Demons clawed their way out of mortal cages, shrieking, laughing, devouring. 1,000 voices rose into one, chanting not in low Gothic, but in a tongue older than stars. The shepherd stood at the center of it all, his arms wide, his head thrown back. Fire erupted from his body, his flesh peeling away to reveal something beneath red armor, ruined and scarred, the armor of an Astartes. He had never been a priest. He had been a word-bearer all along, his disguise only the outer mask of a predator. Now revealed he was magnificent and monstrous. His eyes glowed like twin suns, his voice booming with the force of a god. "Behold," he roared, "your faith has remade you. You are no longer worms groveling in the dust. You are chosen. You are legion." The demons shrieked agreement, their forms merging with the twisted faithful. The square was no longer a place of worship, but a gateway, a rent in reality. Through it, I glimpsed a realm of madness, an ocean of fire, cities of bone, skies writhing with endless wings. The warp had come, and our world was lost. In my chains, I wept. I wept for the children, for the priests, for the faithful who had once sung hymns to the Emperor's light. I wept for myself, for my helplessness, for the knowledge that no aid would come in time. The shepherd's sermon had been perfect. It had turned faith into fuel, devotion into damnation. The last thing I saw before the flames consumed the square was his face, serene, radiant, bloodied. He smiled as though he had saved us. Perhaps, in his way, he believed he had. The ground split, the sky tore, and the world screamed. I do not know if I died in that moment, or if I remained still, trapped in some echo of the shepherd's voice. Hearing it again and again, the lambs must be bled, that the flock may be fed. There is no dawn after such a night. There is only the sermon, endless, echoing through the warp, and so the shrine world was silenced, its light extinguished, not by fire alone, but by words. Words spoken with faith, words sharpened into blades, words that opened the gate. The butcher's sermon was complete.